people by far wait too long to open wines. It's a really sad thing if the wine has already peaked and it's on its downward trajectory. It's a mental mindset. I'm waiting for a special occasion before I open this. But you can make it a special occasion by opening it. It's like waiting till, I don't know, I lose 20 pounds before I'm going to buy myself a nice dress or suit. Well, how about feeling good about yourself and buying an outfit, and because you feel better, then maybe it'll be easier to lose weight. Sometimes tasting wine is tasting life. Don't wait. No one's promised tomorrow. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 191. Why should you open that bottle of wine you've been saving? What makes Icewine such a difficult and expensive wine to produce? And why is the sense of smell such an important part of living a full life? You'll hear those tips and more in part 2 of our chat with Jim Duane, winemaker and host of the popular podcast, Inside Winemaking. You don't have to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but I hope you'll go back if you missed it after you listen to this one. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show with the continuing story of publishing my new wine memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Depression, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much. When you look at the back cover of most books, you'll see quotes from someone well-known saying something nice about the book. These endorsements or blurbs are absolutely vital for encouraging potential readers to buy the book. They're the social proof that the book is not only worth your time and money, but is also the right story for you. In the good old days, publishers secured these blurbs for authors. Now, with drastically reduced budgets and staff, it's up to the author to get them. I'm at that stage now, and I'm cringing. I believe strongly in my book and its message, but I'm feeling just a little ill about asking people for this favor, especially those I don't know well. It's the big names who will mean the most on the cover. So who would these people be? Well, they could be in the wine and food industry, like celebrity chefs, sommeliers, and writers. But I hope this book will find a wider audience beyond food and wine lovers. Yes, I want it to include them, but I hope it gets out there more broadly because the message is wider than just food and wine. Therefore, great endorsers could also be best-selling authors, especially memoirists, and celebrities in other fields such as TV, movies, sports, and other areas. I'd love to hear from you with your suggestions for anyone you think I should approach. Even better, if you or someone you know has a connection with the person you're recommending and you can introduce me, I'd be forever grateful. Either way, I'd appreciate your suggestions. I've posted a link to a blog post called Diary of a Book Launch in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/191. And this is where I share more behind-the-scenes stories on the journey of taking this memoir from idea to publication. If you want a more intimate insider seat beside me on this journey, please let me know you'd like to become a beta reader and get a sneak peek at the manuscript. Email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. Okay, on with the show.
What are some of the most well-known wine regions in Canada? Because I'm really only familiar with BC.
Sure. So in BC, that's further the sub-appellations, that sort of the Russian nesting dolls, if you will, breaks down into the Okanagan Valley is the biggest one in BC, Similkameen Valley, Fraser Valley, the Vancouver Islands, and the Gulf Islands. And then when you get to Ontario, you've got the major big blocks are Niagara is the biggest by far, and that will break down into even smaller regions like the Niagara Bench or Niagara on the Lake and so on. And then you've got Pelee Island and Lake Erie North Shore, which is our most southern tip of the country. And then up north, or a little bit more north of Toronto, is Prince Edward County, which experiences the coldest weather by far. They have to hill the vines, have to, push the dirt up against the vines so that the vines don't die in the winter from winter kill or frost kill. So that's Ontario and BC. Then if you go to Quebec, it's the eastern townships, the far east of the province, the most south, because you're going to get the warmest area there. They produce a lot of the cool climate grapes, German grapes, but also a lot of cider. And then in Nova Scotia, it's in the Annapolis Valley. So you've got the Bay of Fundy, which has the world's highest tides, moderating the temperatures, just like Lake Ontario does in Niagara. So it's making the summers less intensely hot, the winters less intensely cold. And the valley is a bit of a dip that's protected. And that's where you get most of the wineries in Nova Scotia.
All right, very cool. I had a podcast listener once write me an email. He was producing wine in Prince Edward
County, yes, in Ontario.
Okay,
Ontario, yeah.
And I ended up checking out his winery website in the area, and I realized, that's tough country. You got to be hardcore to work up there. I'm sure it's not easy to grow grapes every year. No,
and they call it extreme winemaking. So it's on the edge of everything, including, I think, a nervous breakdown for a lot of these winemakers, because it's just, is it going to work this year? So not only is it the cold, but also if you're making ice wine, you've got all the natural predators like the starlings and the deer and bears and everything else, because the hang time is right into December, January before you're going to even pick those grapes. And you get approximately 1 drop per grape because they've shriveled, they've desiccated, they're dehydrated. So they're like little frozen marbles, and they've been known to break presses too. And you get 1 drop per grape. It's like, these are pathological optimists, I tell you. I don't know what's going on, but I'm fascinated with them.
Back in 2002, I was working in New Zealand. I was down at the Brancott. I'd worked in that vineyard. It's part of Montana Wines, but one of their big estates was the Brancott estate, and they had a lot of white grapes. I mean, just a little bit of Pinot Noir, but they had a couple pretty big blocks of Riesling that they had saved for a sweet wine. I don't think they were really even trying for an ice wine. They were just trying to make a concentrated sweet wine out of this Riesling. Sure. So I worked in the vineyard during the growing season, and I was friends with the vineyard manager, a guy named John Argyle, who's a really lovely man, kind of an early mentor for me. And so I'd been working in the winery during harvest, but I went back out to see the vineyard, and he took me out to that Riesling block. And he was there with his dog. Kills me, I can't remember her name, but she was a lab. And we were walking through this block, and, the leaves were gone. Riesling just looked terrible, but it was still hanging on. And as the dog was running between the rows, she would hit some of the wires, and you could just watch the grapes fall off of the clusters. And so she's running, knocking him off, and then he starts screaming at her to stop running, which had the opposite effect. And so she's going crazier. And we were just watching like thousands of dollars of Riesling berries just fall to the ground because they were so loosely held to the cluster. It was a sad scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And similar story, but it's birds. So the starlings, they just hate them in Niagara. They're like, lots of winemakers call them rats with wings. They just, somebody in the 1800s brought over starlings to New York, Central Park, because they thought Central Park should have every songbird mentioned in Shakespeare's sonnets. So that idiot really was responsible for all the starlings migrating north and eating the grapes. But you'll see these kind of beautiful netting, white nets that look like wedding gowns or something in the middle of winter or through the fall, because the starlings, they will do like these large murmurations, these sort of formations in the air, and then they all start, diving for the grapes, even with the nets on. So you can just see hundreds of thousands of dollars being lifted into the gullets in the air.
Nellie, there is so little Canadian wine in the U.S. Are there trade barriers or tax barriers, or is just the wine being consumed in Canada such that there's not much available to come down to this export market?
I think it's a combination of that we don't produce a lot, that we do drink our wines, though not as much as the wine marketing associations, the provincial wine marketing associations would like. We could do a better job of embracing our own wines, actually. So, but then there are tariffs, but the US is such a huge market, it's really hard to break in. So I think a lot of it has been trying to target prestigious wine lists in restaurants. I think the best way to experience and drink Canadian wine is to come visit.
All right. Well noted. And then for American wine coming up to Canada, you guys get to pay a hefty extra tax. Is that right?
Oh, but you're worth it.
I would hope so, but I'm sure not everything is.
So yes, well, with the exchange rate alone, like ignore taxes, it's about 30% right now. So, but it positions you as very premium. I think we might be your number one market for export, Canada. I may be wrong on that, but I know the California wines specifically are very popular in the liquor store. So, we get lots of different wineries, lots of different grapes and styles and regions. There's no tiring of California wines. They just seem to increase in popularity every year. And I think your marketing organization, the California Wine Council, does a great job up here. They have a wine fair that's coming across our country in April and May and June, and they hit 5 major Canadian cities. They do an event for the trade, so restaurants and media, and then in the evening, they do one for consumers. And the turnout for that is really great.
Very cool. I'm glad you're getting to taste some. For your sort of body of work and the wines that you're tasting, do you tend to focus on any specific place, or are you really going all throughout the world to try the whole variety of countries and productions?
I am universal in my tastes and scope. What I try to focus on first is wines that are available in Canada so that my readers can buy them. But increasingly, that is a pretty wide range because my site visitors come from coast to coast. And so the availability varies widely. So the selection is huge. But I also have lots of readers from the United States or visitors and podcast listeners and from other countries. So when someone wants to send me wines that aren't necessarily available in Canada, I welcome that too. It just takes a bit more paperwork and an Ontario agent so that they don't get stuck in customs. But yeah, I taste everything. I am open to everything. I'm very thirsty.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about pairing. Can you describe the list of courses that you currently have available? I know you have some free material as intro material. Where does it go beyond there?
Sure. So,
or maybe you can talk about that free material. So if listeners are interested, they can check that out.
Absolutely. So if you go to my homepage, nataliemclean.com, there is the Ultimate Food and Wine Pairing Guide, and you can download that. It's a template that you can either keep on your phone or your laptop, or you can print it out if you want. Some people like to have it in the kitchen or the cellar. And it's kind of every type of it's groupings of wine. So, red wine from light to full-bodied, white wine from light to full-bodied to sweet, dessert, and so on, sparkling. And then all kinds of different dishes and pairing ideas to go with those groups of wines. So that's kind of a good entry point. That template kind of simplifies it, but not so much that it's not useful. At least that's what people say. And then from there, you can use the wine and food pairing tools that are interactive tools. There's no cost to those, or my mobile apps. The tools are on those as well. And then you get to the courses. So the flagship course is the Winesmart Course, a full-bodied framework to taste, pair, and buy wine like a pro. And it is open to both novices and experts. I do love the mix of people. And we go deep dive into every type of food pairing that you can imagine. Plus, there are other tips, how to serve wine and temperature and all that sort of thing. But the core focus is all about pairings. And then I have a separate course where I pair just cheese and wine. And as you know, Jim, cheese is, I think, almost or as varied as wine. There's so many types of cheeses and different rinds and different countries and inoculations, like if you're talking blue cheese and all the rest of it. And I just think wine and cheese were made to go together, just like peanut butter and jelly or ice cream and chocolate sauce. I mean, they're both natural liquids, milk, grape juice, go through fermentation, as they age, they develop all of these complex characteristics that makes them more interesting. And so we take a deep dive into cheese because we can't do that within the main course to the extent I'd like to. We definitely get into cheese, but this course is all about cheese. So it's somewhere between 25 and 35 types of cheese, and then all the different wines that pair with it. So those are my main courses right now. I kind of like to focus on those.
Okay, and then this is for my own benefit. I've started making a Grenache from Paso Robles.
Yes.
And so I've been thinking about good or ideal pairings for Grenache. So if you think of, Grenache being light in color, maybe big on spice, some earth, fruit kind of depending on the site, I would say my Grenache is quite fruity. What are dishes that come to mind that would work well with the Grenache? Not French Grenache that might be higher in acid, but California Grenache that's a little bit more full and opulent.
Sure. Like you can start simply, and I think that's good for a lot of people. It's less intimidating than starting with some dish that requires a lot of ingredients and cooking preparation, but just pasta and meat sauce, even spaghetti and meatballs would be fun, even meatballs with a little bit of spice added to them. Any sort of meaty dish, I think, would go beautifully. I love Grenache because it's got all this flavor and yet it's so smooth. So you don't have to worry about, I think, with the California Grenaches that I've tasted, they're not tannic, like something that you might have to worry about more with Cabernet. And so with that smoothness, I love, lamb dishes, something equally juicy and opulent as well. But it will also go with many cheeses. Hard cheeses would be great. And even just, mixed nuts, walnuts, whatever, because, walnuts are going to give you those tannins, that drying mouth sensation. So how do you compensate? Well, you bring in a juicy wine to wet your palate again. So that sort of contrasting of flavors and textures is really fun for your mouth.
I've never heard someone suggest nuts, and specifically walnuts. So that's something I'm going to try tonight. I appreciate that. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's how I describe tannins to my students, because tannins can be such a hard thing to figure out if you're new to it. But I say, think about, you've just eaten walnuts, a mouthful of walnuts, or sipped on way over steep tea. That's tannin. That's that feeling of, your mouth puckering and just drying up. And what we want to rush in there is a nice juicy wine with no tannins or smooth tannins.
Right. What are some of the most common questions you get from people that are new to wine?
Is this wine any good and how much is it worth? I got it as a gift. So everybody wants to see if they can sell it somewhere. No, but pairing questions, definitely. Pairing is the number one category of questions I get asked. So often they're starting with a dish. Got ossobuco, what pairs? Well, of course, that's an easy one, something like a smooth red or a burgundy. But also people love to experiment with cuisine. So I try to get them to think out of the box and, back to that off-dry Riesling with something spicy. The other category of questions is how long will this wine keep? And people hold on to wine, I think, too long.
Right.
Especially special bottles that they bought because they were expensive or they lugged them back from a visit or whatever. And on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast, one of my favorite guests, their husband and wife couple who used to write the Wall Street Journal column, Dorothy Gator and John Brusher, and they instituted Open That Bottle Night. So this ties in with the question, when should I open the bottle? Tonight, usually. Now, some wines do need some aging, of course, and that's great. But people by far wait too long to open wines. And it's a really sad thing if the wine has already peaked and it's on its downward trajectory. But I think it's a mental mindset sometimes. I'm waiting for a special occasion before I open this, but you can make it a special occasion by opening it. It's like waiting till, I don't know, I lose 20 pounds before I'm going to buy myself a nice dress or suit. Well, how about feeling good about yourself and buying an outfit, and because you feel better and you look good, then maybe it'll be easier to lose weight. I don't know, probably a really twisted metaphor there, but they told me some great stories on the podcast about people who had bought a wine, a man who bought a wine with his wife years ago. They were going to open it for their anniversary. She died, which is sad, but then he opened it and it brought back memories of their trip together and he loved it. And, they got 1,000 letters on that column. The first column they wrote about open that bottle night. It's actually every February 27th. We're coming up on it. And they were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for that column because it had so many human stories. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes tasting wine is tasting life. Don't wait. As they said, no one's promised tomorrow.
I can't tell you the number of times, I guess it's not a crazy number, but where I have been in social settings where I get introduced as the wine guy. Uh-huh. And then it's always men. They'll take me to their wine collection and show me their prized bottles. And I'm not talking about like super sophisticated consumers here, but, people are just mildly sort of interested, but have a couple bottles that they're holding on to. And they'll show me the bottle, they'll be all excited about it, they'll tell me about it, and then we'll go back and they'll open some much cheaper bottle one. Let's be nice about it. It's just like a prize object to look at.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me cringe. Yeah. I don't know what they're waiting for, but
it's like looking at life through amber or a glass. Like, no, actually go for the experience. Stop looking at it through glass.
And then the worst part about it is oftentimes it's not a wine that's really going to age well. So
right.
I don't want to be rude. So I'm polite and compliment them on their wonderful aging skills. But yeah, wine is to be drunk.
It is. And shared. And it's that experience. I mean, this, Jim, like smell is a big part of wine. Taste, but especially smell. It's the only sense tied directly to memory and emotion. And you open that bottle and you can go back to exactly where you were, where you had it the first time or where you purchased it or whatever. It's like a little wire that touches off those neurons in your brain, brings you right back there.
It's absolutely right. So that kind of tees up a question, which is, what did your childhood smell like? Or do you have any strong memories of growing up? You said Nova Scotia, is that right?
Yeah, Nova Scotia. No one's ever asked me that. I love that question. What did my childhood smell like? So aside from the lima beans, which I've brought up probably too many times now, I would go to an island. Like back in these days, they could go and do things on their own. But I would go to an island, there was a lifeguard and there was swimming, but I remember all these wild roses. And so they grew in big bushes. So I'd go into the freezing cold water, come out, and I remember drying myself in the sun, letting the sun beat down on my shoulders. But right at my head, like just a few feet away from my head, were these rows and rows of wild roses. And I remember the smell of the roses baking in the sun as I dried off. And I just love that smell. And sometimes I'll get it on some wines and I'm right back there on that beach. It's just a beautiful, beautiful smell. The other smell or aroma is being out in the backyard of my grandparents' home in the summer. And she would hand make blankets. And I loved it because they smelled like her and smelled like her biscuits and all sorts of things. So I would spread a blanket in the backyard and just lie down in it and sleep because it smelled like her and everything good and safe and calm. And I would just nuzzle up, putting my nose in her blanket, just sniff at the blanket. Weird little child, but I love those smells.
We've all done it. We're no judging.
But those are definitely the iconic smells that I remember now. I appreciate you asking that.
Yeah, sure. I bought the kit, forgive my terrible French.
Vendée?
Yes, thank you. That one.
Oh, yeah.
It's a spendy kit, but I have a great time with my two daughters. We've done it twice in the past week. In fact, where we sit at home and it's got 54 different aroma samples, but number 28 is rose. And there is no aroma in that kit that elicits the sort of positive, the sort of emotion I think you just described with the quilt and the blanket, like rose. My daughters love that smell. And it's very interesting that different smells, like some are just, it's orange. It just smells like orange. And, it's kind of easy to identify. I like that my kids are much better at this than I am. It maybe has to do with memory and their young, fresh brains. But
that's great. It's great that you're training them too. Because
I can't have them taste wine. So this is kind of like the most parallel type activity, I think.
Exactly. And, we train kids or teach them all sorts of things in terms of visual, they learn to read, they learn to do all sorts of things at school, but no one pays attention to the sense of smell anymore. And it should be part of an education because it's part of our world. It's part of living a full sensory life, whether you drink wine or not. I mean, we get, 80 to 90% of our input visually, but the smell is so powerful. It's so ancient. It's tribal. I mean, I think it's how people fall in love, and yet we ignore it for the most part.
I used to play this game when I was a kid. I would go with my friend down to the grocery store. We could walk from his house down to the grocery store, and we would take turns. One person sits in the cart and covers their eyes. The other person pushes the cart and go through the aisles of the grocery store. You would have to identify the aisle just based on the smell.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I love that.
There's a couple aisles of packaged goods that were really hard to identify because there's not a whole lot of aroma. But I suggest anyone try this because there's some real surprises. Produce is pretty easy to nail. The meat and the fish section, obviously pretty easy to nail.
Yes.
But there's those in-between aisles, like some are hard, but some are like the paper towel and the paper goods aisle. Like you'd be surprised how quickly people could identify that. A lot of it is because of the, the scented compounds that have been added to those products.
Sure. That's brilliant. I love that idea. I think that should be part of sommelier training or winemaking training.
Right. Well, I mean, it's free. We would do that and we'd go across the street to Taco Bell and we didn't have money. So we would just smell the Taco Bell and it was great. We'd get hungry and we had an afternoon for $0.
That is great. How creative.
And, we just fell into that. But it's one of those things where I look back and I'm like, oh, yeah, I've always been interested in scent, maybe a little bit more than the average person.
Sure. I think that's probably what draws a lot of us to wine. Like it's that yearning to not only to experience those scents, but also to find them again and to identify them so that we can recapture those experiences. I mean, that drove me from the first time I had the aha wine. I thought, I need to know how to put this in words and to find it again so I can keep having this experience.
Right. But you know what pisses me off to the nth degree is my continual inability to differentiate chocolate and vanilla.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, that's in that kit. I get it right 51% of the time, and it's just maddening how many times I cannot get it right.
Well, you just have to, 10,000 hours and you'll get it.
I should leave them out on the kitchen counter and smell them every day when I get home. Natalie, is there anything else that you want to talk about or mention from all of your work before we start wrapping this up?
No, I loved this chat. I loved our last one too on my podcast. So, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. People are welcome to connect with me on social or at my site, nataliemclean.com. And as I mentioned, I'd love if any of your listeners would like to be beta readers of my new book, just to email me, natalie@nataliemclean.com. And I just love to connect over those experiences.
Okay. And I apologize. I'm not going to be a beta reader, but that's only because I struggle with reading. But one thing that I hope you will do, and I'm sure that you will do, was just to insert some honesty, because I've read a few wine books, and that was enough to make me never want to read sort of wine biographies again. I think the worst is the Robert Mondavi story, which is a total fluff piece. So I think you actually bearing your soul a little bit is going to be only to your benefit.
I hope so. Yeah. I'm sorry to hear you've been scarred by wine memoirs. Let's hope we can heal that somehow.
They haven't all been terrible. Just the Mondavi one was just bull from beginning to end.
Well, good to note that. Mine will come out as an audiobook, so maybe you can listen to it.
It certainly will, as soon as it's on audio. And you're reading it, right?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
I'm in.
Yep. I'm a control freak. It's like, I know where to laugh, where to cry. I'm doing this.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time. This has been a lot of fun. Your social media handle, is that your name as well, Natalie McLean?
Yeah, most of them are. It's either Natalie McLean or Natalie McLean Wine if Natalie McLean was taken. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can find you.
You can find me. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. This has been great, Jim. I really love this conversation. I mean, just definitely, as I mentioned before, I'm going to have to do it in person someday when all the craziness of COVID is done.
Yes. Very much looking forward to that. Okay, Natalie, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
All right. Cheers, Jim.
All right. Good luck with the book.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Jim. In the show notes, you'll find my email contact, the full transcript of my conversation with Jim, links to his podcast and website, and where you can find the live stream video version of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. You'll also find a link to my free class called The 5 Food and Wine Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/191. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or want to be a beta reader of my new memoir at natalie@nataliemclean.com. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with Joy Rebar, a mystery writer whose novels are set in wineries. In the meantime, if you missed episode 32, go back and take a listen. I chat about orange wines and pairings for meatless burgers. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite. Orange wines are white wines that are made like red wines. Are you confused yet? They start out making a white wine. That's what they do. Their intention first is white wine, but then they leave the grape skins on during fermentation, just as red wines do, and white wines do not. This imparts a distinctive color, flavor, and texture, whereas the skins are removed to ferment white wine. Orange wine also has more exposure to oxygen, which adds a savory character called umami. So that's the fifth taste, along with sweet, salty, bitter, and sour umami, often described as deliciousness. You get it in Parmesan cheese and cooked mushrooms, and so on. It's made from fresh white or pink vinifera or permitted hybrid grapes. All the grapes are macerated and fermented on their skins for 10 days to achieve the color of orange. 10 days. If you liked this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wines and stories we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a Canadian ice wine or orange wine. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.